Greetings, my dear viewers. It is I, Drayon, and welcome back to Pathfinder Hero Frame, where we take a look at the different ancestries within Pathfinder 2nd Edition and see what the lore can tell us about creating playable characters using that ancestry. We're going to be taking a look at all the recommended backgrounds and classes and adding a couple of my own suggestions based off of the lore. And today we are taking a look at the Goblins, one of the common ancestries. Not only are they a very common pest in the world like your typical RPG, but they are common enough that they are indeed a playable ancestry. And there is a good amount of info to go off of when creating monsters. But for playable characters, it's a little tricky. Because, well, the lore would suggest that they would make terrible player characters. Because more often than not, you are going to be playing as heroes. And goblins, especially within the context of Pathfinder lore, aren't good guys. If we were using the alignment system, they are neutral good at best. More often than not, chaotic good when it comes to the alignment system, but for the most part, when we talk about goblins, we are talking about evil-aligned creatures. Anywhere from neutral evil to chaotic evil. So, when it comes to a player character goblin, you will have either chaotic good, chaotic neutral, chaotic evil, or neutral evil. Maybe even a true neutral if we are talking about very specific goblins. But they are not tolerated. Goblins are not trusted. And it is quite easy to see why, given the context of the lore. But let's go ahead and dive into the heritages to somewhat explain what is going on. So for our goblin heritages, we have the Charhide Goblin, the Dokabe Goblin, the Iron Gut Goblin, the Razor Tooth Goblin, and Snow Goblin. There is also the Tailed Goblin, also called Monkey Goblins. We also have the Tree Dweller Goblin and the Unbreakable Goblin. Like I said, there are a lot of goblins. In fact, they were so abundant that they were expendable forces in the war known as the Goblin Blood War. They were forced into this war by their much taller cousins, the Hobgoblins, during the Goblin Blood War against the nation of Izgir. They had no choice in the matter, but all the same, they are treated as monsters. Since a lot of them still did the normal goblin things during the war. That was the whole point. The hobgoblins, technically, yes, they did subjugate their smaller cousins, but they mainly use them for their natural talents. Explosions, scavenging, and taking down certain creatures that were smaller than the hobgoblins, but still a nuisance. In fact, goblins today have a fear/hatred towards dogs and horses. So much hatred/fear, in fact, that their two main weapons are called the dog slicer and the horse chopper. Goblins like wolves and wargs, but they do not like regular dogs. So if you have a party member who is a shoonie, I do not recommend playing as a goblin, unless you and the shoonie player cooperate and have an understanding that your two characters will have an intense rivalry. I think it'd be funny, but again, you're going to have consent with the other player. With that being said, the recommended backgrounds for a goblin are acrobat, criminal, entertainer, gladiator, hunter, and street urchin. Entertainer because goblins like to sing songs. Kinda weird. But there is an ancestry feat called Goblin Song. It's basically just a bunch of war songs about their folklore, about their grand deeds. In fact, I used that as another background option. So let's go ahead and get into those. The backgrounds that I recommend are the Animal Whisperer, since they have wargs and rodents known as goblin dogs. Bandits, since they are the stereotypical bandit. Cannoneer, Cook, Crown of Chaos, Cultist, Deckhand, Driver. Elementally infused, I would recommend Fire, Air, or Wood. Feral Child, Fireworks Performer, Freed Slave, to hint at the subjugation of the hobgoblins. Free Spirit, Gambler, Goblin Blood Orphan, as an homage to the Goblin Blood War, since that war took not only the families of humans, but also of goblins and hobgoblins. Junk Collector, Junker, Mechanic, Refugee, Saboteur, Scavenger, Scout, Sewer Dragon. A little lore tidbit that I had come across is that they are actually dwellers of sewers in certain cities, being used as janitorial staff and pest control. Song Singer in Training, to reference these war songs that the goblins like to sing. Tall Tale, because a lot of goblin stories are over-exaggerations of the actual events. Warrior, and Wild Wood Local. The classes that are recommended are the Alchemist, the Bard, the Rogue, and the Sorcerer, but I can also see the Fighter and Alchemist being prominent roles as a goblin character. Moving on to our classes, let's go ahead and start things off with the Alchemist. The most obvious research field to pick for a goblin is, of course, the Bomber. You're probably not going to have any chirurgeons or toxicologists, but I wouldn't put it past anyone to build one of those two characters. Goblins are a little bit squishy, so they might need a little bit of a health bonus just to get by 1 or 2 more rounds. Moving on to the Barbarian. For your instincts, I would like to recommend the Animal, more specifically the Wolf, the Blood Rager, and the Elemental, once again going into fire, air, and wood elements. Next is the Bard. For your muses, I would like to recommend the Maestro, the Warrior, and Zophonia. Again, going off of Wolves, Goblin Dogs, and the Warg. Moving on to the Champion. Probably not going to be a common class choice, but the causes of desecration, iniquity, and liberation would make for a perfect Goblin Champion. For your Cleric, the recommended deity is going to be Caden Kalian. Secondly, the Demon Lord turned Goddess Lamashtu is sort of a grandmother figure to the Goblins, and many Goblins serve Lamashtu. Why do I say grandmother figure? Well, Lamashtu had stolen a section of Hell. This section of Hell contained the 4 original Barghest. These Barghests parented the Goblin race, giving them their 4 main attributes. I do not remember the names of these Barghests, but I do roughly remember their attributes. The first was the honor of the tribe, being able to work together to complete a goal. The second was hunger, needing to collect and eat a lot of food, and also going to raid other villages to steal their food. The third... What was the third? I don't remember the third. The fourth was scavenging. Going to the shore to scavenge any materials that they can find. I almost want to say the third was something more related to Lamashtu's case, but I don't remember what it was. I'll put it up on screen once I figure that part out. Anywho, Lamashtu and Caden Kalian. I'm sure there are a couple of other gods that would be worthy of the title of served deities. Maybe even those original Barghests are considered deities. I don't know. Let's go ahead and move on to the Druid. The Druidic Orders of the Flame and Untamed are going to be what I recommend for your Goblin. Going over to Oracle, the Mysteries of Ash, Battle, and Flames are well suited for any Goblin adventurer. Next is the Rogue. I would highly recommend the Mastermind Rogue. Being able to work over a clan of goblins to commit various crimes would actually be very fitting of a goblin, similar to Krinko Mob Boss. You also have the Ruffian and the Thief Racket. Next is the Sorcerer. For your bloodlines, we are going to reference the 4 Barghests by going with the Demonic bloodline. But another decent bloodline would be the Elemental bloodline. However, unlike the other Elemental options, we are instead going with the element of just fire and wood. Next is the Swashbuckler. For these styles, we are going to go with the Braggart and the Rascal. However, a notable style that I do not recommend for a stereotypical goblin character, but would work perfectly mechanically with the unbreakable goblin heritage, is the gymnast swashbuckler, as it works in tandem with ancestry feats such as the bouncy goblin and similar ancestry features, where you do not want to get knocked down or can easily stand right back up. I think it's fun, and it's actually a style that I used for my very first joke character for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. I called this goblin Wibble, after Wibble Wobbles. They wibble and they wobble, but they don't fall down. Anyway, yeah, that's what I ended up going with. It was inspired by another person's goblin build using the Unbreakable Goblin for non-combat purposes. But I liked how the Unbreakable Goblin and the Gymnast style work together. I would even recommend going with the background of the Aerialist, as it also gives you a couple of features that work well with these Goblin and Gymnast features. Moving on to our final class, the Witch. Yes, I said final. The Magus and the Wizard are not on this list because goblins hate reading. They do not want to touch books. They refuse to read. Kind of reminds me of certain customers that I had when I worked fast food. Anywho, for our witch patron themes, I would recommend Devourer of Decay to go off of the 4 Barghests. I also recommend Silence in Snow, mostly to go in tandem with Snow Goblins, and Wilding Steward for Tree Dwellers and some of the other Goblin heritages. And with that being said, that is all I have for you today. But before we go, there is one funny fact that I was able to find during my research. According to Goblin culture, the more overweight you are, the more attractive you are. I can't keep a straight face. But that's not all. Bar guests are seen as supernaturally attractive beings to the goblins. So, if you want to be seen as unnaturally attractive to a goblin, you need to be, and this is the words that I read from the entry, you need to be an obese Barghest. I mean, it works with Greek culture, where overweightness was seen as an attractive feature before we got into muscularity being an attractive feature. So it sort of checks out culturally, but it is still funny. In order to be considered attractive, you need to be an overweight furry. An overweight demonic furry. Okay, that's everything. I'll see you all next time when I am online.